Hello and welcome to this lesson on group policy management. Before we start, we need to understand what policy management is all about. What is group policy? It is a feature of Microsoft Windows that provides a centralized management and configuration of operating systems. So you can basically set any Windows computer to be however you want to see fit. So this configuration could be done at the level that can be applied to multiple computers that are connected to the domain or in a network. It's used to configure operating systems, applications, and user settings within an Active Directory environment, for instance, our current lab environment. And it also allows administrators to enforce some security protocols that enable the better improvement of services and creates a block when it comes to vulnerability management. It can't be penetrated. Users are not given some tools to create any destructions. For instance, you can't allow USBs to be read on the machine. So if you plug in a USB to a device, it wouldn't read. It would say access denied. Things like that, right? Next about group policy management is, now that we know what it is from a basic point of view, what are some of the components? So we have basically the object, which basically holds the settings that are going to be applied to organizational units, to users, to computers within the group. And it's normally created, so how to configure that policy, those settings. Okay, I want this machine to turn off at this time. I want this machine to turn on at this time. I want this PC to have this desktop background. I want only this PC to have access to USB. How to set those up in a setting is used by an application or a snap-in called the Group Policy Editor, which we would be exploring in the practical session. And when it comes to applying the policies after it's created, we have to discuss something to do with scope. So how far can the group policy reach? So long as it's a resource or an object that's within the environment, it is connected to the domain, it is an Active Directory, it is managed by the domain controller, then that includes how far it can be targeted. So that's the scope. So we are talking about domain-wide, site-wide, OU-specific applications and stuff like that. What are some of the benefits of group policy? Obviously, it provides a platform where you can centrally manage a wide range of computers and objects, and it ensures a consistency of application of configurations because it's going to be applied to multiple objects or multiple users or multiple computers. It means there's a high level of consistency. Imagine if you were to do those settings on every machine one by one. There could be a chance that you forget to maybe configure a setting on one machine and forget another setting on a different machine. So that is eliminated by using group policy object, where it's applied to a multiple wide range of objects within the network, hence consistency. And it's also used to employ security enforcements like we talked about to do with the USBs. People can't run some softwares, they actually need admin credentials. A whole lot of security tools that can be applied using this medium. And it also allows automation. So system administrators can automate some repetitive tasks and configurations. That saves time and reducing the likelihood of making mistakes. The next thing we'll just basically talk about is, so now that you know all of this, if you're a system administrator, what are some of the things that you'll be doing on your day-to-day activities when you're going to work? What are some of the administrative tasks that you'll be doing that has a high level of group policy element in it? So you're likely to be creating those policies yourself. You're likely to be editing those policies because normally when you go to a new environment, probably the group policies are already created, but you need to have the technical skills to know how to go and find those policies and manage them as and when the user requirements change, because we live in a changing environment where things are not static. Change comes and then systems are needed to be adapted to these changes. So for instance, if you need to modify a change that is going to accommodate a new direction of the organization. For instance, if the organization has rebranded, they're now having a logo that's changed and all their desktops is having a logo that's the old one, you need to know how to go and find which particular group policy is applying that desktop background as a policy and then modify it. You might find yourself doing those tasks. You need to know how to configure policy settings. You need to know how to deploy software. You need to know how to enforce those security policies. Next is, what are some of the best practices when it comes to group policy management? Obviously, in the world of IT, before you deploy anything, you need to create a controllable environment where you can plan and test how whatever you want to deploy works, how it behaves, what are some of the problems you're likely to encounter, so you can solve it. And once you solve it, you know that when you go to production, when you go to finally deploy to the main object, you're not going to have setbacks. And it's always good to have a proper understanding of the organizational unit structure within your Active Directory. Is it based on locations? Is it based on functions? Is it based on what's the topography of your Active Directory tree? How are you going to categorize a group of people from another group of people? When that's understood, then you know how to apply GPOs to specific OUs. And you might have GPOs that would have certain things that wouldn't need to give access to a different OU. So how to apply that, it will be easier if you already had OU separate in those two entities. If it is the case that it's not the case, you would have to find a way to restructure or create a new OU and have some of those objects put together in that OU so that you can apply that group policy object to it. You need to always document your job. You need to document all the things you did so that someone else can also know how to do it and understand what you did. And if you ever make a mistake in the future, you can always go back to your notes and see what did you do wrong, and then documentation can help you resolve them. You should also regularly monitor your group policy application and use reporting tools to track changes, troubleshoot issues, and ensure compliance with organizational policies. The next and final thing we might talk about is some of the considerations and challenges whenever you're in group policy management. You need to assess the impact on performance. If you deploy a group policy that's poorly designed, it might lead to highly negative consequences that would probably impact system configurations. For instance, you deployed a group policy that's going to deny some network services, but then you never knew that some people within that OU that you deployed that to probably need some of those network services to work away from home. So some of that impact, you need to consider some of these things before you roll out group policies. There could be the case of conflicting policies. You have an OU that is not going to allow people to use USBs. But then there are 2 or 3 people in there that you've also configured with a different policy to allow USB. So you have one object in 2 different OUs that one OU is applying allow USB and the other OU is applying not to allow USB. That's conflicting. So how to go about structuring OUs in a way that you don't have overlapping policies that may result in unintended consequences or behavior is something you should consider. Version control. You need to know how to implement a version control mechanism to track changes in your GPOs and roll back to previous versions if it's necessary. Security concerns has to do with making sure that you employ the proper security measures that are in place to protect your GPO from unauthorized access or modification. What kind of admin credentials can access GPO? What kind of tier administration are you going to use to access GPO management? In an IT environment, you have system administrators, you have level 2 support technicians, and you have level 1 support technicians. It could be that level 1 and level 2 don't necessarily need access to be able to edit GPOs. Maybe they can only read, and only the system administrator could have write and modification permissions. You need to know how to apply these security protocols to make sure that these are in place so that no one with unauthorized access can go into making changes to these GPOs. So this is more about a theoretical point of view of understanding how group policy management is. And the next couple of snip videos that are coming up, we will be start to applying some of the practical perspectives of how GPO is being deployed and used and managed. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.